Hello everyone, my name is Eric DeBoard and I'm an Azure TSP at Microsoft focused on education. Today I wanted to take a few minutes to share with you how you can bring your Windows Server license to Azure. This is known as the hybrid use benefit for Windows. Today we're going to talk about the steps to use the hybrid use benefit, also known as the hub benefit, for Windows VMs. We're going to discuss the image prerequisites and tools, and finally we're going to have a demo of an image upload and deployment. You can find out more details of this entire process at the URL listed at the bottom of this slide. There are a few steps that we have to think about when we want to use the hybrid use benefit. Step one is we need to have a subscription, storage, and network already deployed in Azure. This is typical for any virtual machine. In step two, we're going to prepare an on-premise image for Azure. In step three, we're going to upload that image. And in step four, we're going to create VMs from that image in Azure. Keep in mind that you can save up to 41% of the cost compared to using Azure images alone. This is because when you deploy images from the Azure portal, Microsoft assumes that you do not have a license. This entire process is to show Microsoft that you do have a license and therefore allow you to only pay for compute charges for your Azure Windows VMs. There are a number of prerequisites that we have to think about when we want to bring our license to Azure. First of all, we want to have an image ready for deployment, and we want to download the VM extensions and installation tools from the URL aka.ms/edu/VM extensions. This basically puts the tools into your image that will be useful for restarting your VM, monitoring your VM, and a number of other items once it's in Azure. Once you've installed that into your template, you'll need to sysprep your image. This is the typical sysprep. There's nothing special about this. Just run the sysprep tool and shut down your VM. We also need to make sure that if you're running Hyper-V, your image is a Generation 1 VM. It must also be using a fixed VHD. We do not support dynamically expanding VHDs. Note that if your current image is a VHDX, you can convert that VHDX to a VHD using the Hyper-V management tool before uploading. Finally, when you go to deploy this image multiple times, the image must exist in the storage accounts where VMs will be deployed. So if you have multiple storage accounts, you'll want to make sure there's a copy of that image in each of those storage accounts. If you're running VMware and you use VMware images, you can also convert those to a VHD using the Microsoft VM Converter tool, which is a free download. Finally, to upload the image, we have to use PowerShell. So you'll want to download the most recent Azure PowerShell module from azure.com under the Resources tab and downloads. Also note that you can use the same media you use on-premise if you want to start from scratch. And when you do deploy your images in Azure, you do have to provide a key as you normally would on-premise, and you'll just use your normal Mac key. Okay, so here are the 4 steps that I've outlined. The first step is completed in advance. I've gone ahead and created a storage account in Azure called edu hub demo. I've also created a VNet called edu-vnet, and a subnet on that VNet that I will use is called production. In step 2, I've also completed that in advance, and that is that I've prepared a 2012 R2 image, sysprepped it, and put it on my local machine, and I've named that Azure Hub Demo.vhd. Now we're going to do step 3 with a demo and step 4 with a demo. Note that we do not demo using a JSON template. However, this is a great alternative to deploying VMs in Azure. And basically what it involves is a text file that basically, at the most simple form, is a recipe. And you submit that recipe to Azure, and it basically creates what is in the recipe. So it's a really cool tool, and you'll find other information about that in other blogs. Let's get to the demo. Okay, here we are in the Windows PowerShell Integrated Scripting Environment console, where we're going to use PowerShell to upload our image and deploy our image to a virtual machine. The first thing we need to do is attach to our Azure account using the login Azure RM account commandlet. Once we've run that commandlet, we can use the get Azure RM subscription to enumerate the subscriptions to which our account has access. And then we can use the select Azure RM subscription commandlet, and choose the subscription ID of the subscription that we want to actually deploy resources to. Now, I've already accessed and logged into my account, and so we're going to move on to step 3. Step 3 is basically going to provide us with the upload of our virtual machine image, as we discussed in the previous slide. We've already done steps 1 and 2. The commandlet of importance here is add-azure rmvhd. It's a very straightforward commandlet where you provide a destination. I'm providing my storage account in Azure, and I've also tagged on this images container which I created in my Azure account, and I'm going to upload my image to Azure and name it 2012r2.vhd. This storage account, where my destination is located in the resource group edu demo resource group, or RG, and then the local file I'm uploading is Azure Hub Demo VHD in the images folder of my C drive. Now you'll notice that the name of the file that I'm uploading is different than the destination file, and that's because we can, whatever name we provide in this part of the commandlet is what is used as the file name in Azure. So let me go ahead and run this command. And what you'll see here is that the add Azure rmvhd will calculate an MD5 hash just to verify data integrity. Once that's complete, we will start uploading the file. Okay, some time has passed now, and you can see that my file upload has completed. And that's really it. That's how simple it is to upload a file. And of course, the amount of time that it takes will vary based on your connectivity. So the next major step to deploying our own image is to actually use that image to deploy a new virtual machine. And everything about this process is very similar to what you typically do if you deploy a virtual machine using PowerShell. We're going to assign some basic variables. We're going to create a configuration for our virtual machine and then finally deploy it. So the first thing I have here is I am assigning a credential that will be used for the local administrator on my virtual machine. So if I run this commandlet, it's basically going to pop up a window that lets me define my username for my local administrator. So I'm just going to do something simple like Azure EDU, and then I have to have a somewhat complex password, and I've defined here that it must contain uppercase, lowercase, numeric, and a special character. I have used that. That's just the default requirement for a password for the local administrator of a Windows VM. So we've captured that variable. Next thing is I'm just going to assign the VM name that I'm going to use for my configuration later. I'm going to assign the resource group. Where will this VM land? I'm going to create a variable for the storage account. So I'm getting the name of my storage account out of Azure, and I'm assigning that to a variable. The next thing I'm going to do here is name the actual operating system disk. So when I deploy this new virtual machine, what do I want the VM names, or I'm sorry, the virtual disk name to be? So here I am combining the VM name that I provided in the variable before, and I'm adding OS disk to the end of it. So that's going to be the name of my VHD file once this is deployed. The next variable here is requesting, or this is where I'm defining the actual path to that OS disk name. So this is going to be my storage account and a folder called, or a container called VHDs. So when this VM gets deployed, it will be called the OS disk name, and it will be placed in the VHDs container. This is a domain controller. I happen to have named it to be a domain controller name. So one of the things you have to do with the domain controller is make sure that your OS disk caching option is set to none. That can cause issues with Active Directory. So I'm going to set a variable to configure that parameter or property of my new virtual machine. We also have the ability to have read-write or read-only caching. Now, this variable, URI of uploaded image, is going to be the actual source image for my virtual machine deployment, or in other words, the template. So this is a pretty important variable. This is basically the file we just uploaded. So that's the source. And then I'm going to deploy this VM in the South Central US data center, or region, I'm sorry.
So those are some of the basic variables I've set up for my virtual machine, just getting things defined, not really doing anything with them yet. The next thing I'm going to define is some networking for my virtual machine. So what VNet is this VM going to be connected to, and what subnet of that VNet? So I'm going to just create a variable called VNet, which is going to get my Azure REM virtual network, which I've already defined in Azure, edu VNet, in the resource group that I have defined earlier. Then I'm going to set my subnet to be production, which is a subnet of the VNet I just defined here. And then finally, I'm going to create a network interface called vnic-vm name, so it's going to be my VM's name, and I'm going to add production to this. So this just kind of makes Azure a little more clean, and you can see, if you see an object for an interface, for a network interface, you know exactly which VM it belongs to. So I like to do that. I'm placing it in this subnet that I defined and in this location. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm getting a handle. As I create this NIC, this command actually creates my network interface for me, but I'm getting a handle on it so I can use that network interface as an assignment later on. So I'm going to run that commandlet. And you'll notice this is giving me some output that this commandlet's going to have a change in the future. So often you'll see some information when you run commandlets to let you know things are changing a little bit, and you can read a little bit more about them. Okay, so I have officially created a network interface, and I've got a handle of $nic as a variable name. So those are all the variables that I need to define for my VM configuration. The next thing I'm going to do here is actually combine all of that into a configuration variable. So my $VM config variable is going to be equal to a new Azure REM VM config with the name VM name and the size of the virtual machine I want to deploy. And of course, we know there's all sorts of different sizes here. I'm choosing a standard DS3. I'm going to set the operating system to Windows, the computer name to VM name, the credential that's going to be used during the deployment as the $cred that I provided earlier, and I also want to provision the VM agent. I'm setting the Azure REM VM OS disk, so this is basically saying create a VM OS disk and attach it to this VM. It's going to be the OS disk name. Here's the URI, which is the location where this VM is going to be placed. So that is the full path to VHD's folder and the name of my OS disk name. I'm creating from an image, and my source image is going to be the source template. And this is the variable we set earlier that points to our template. And of course, this is going to be a Windows machine. And then finally, I'm adding the interface that I created earlier to this VM and marking it as primary, which you must do for the first interface. So let's run all of that, and that's going to build our configuration. And then finally, we are going to run the commandlet to build our virtual machine. So that's new Azure Resource Manager VM. I want to place it in this resource group, in this location, and my license type, this is key, this is actually where your hub benefit gets enabled. My license type is going to be Windows Server. So that means that we are only going to be charging for compute. And then I am saying use this VM config. Okay, so let's run that commandlet. Alright, we got another warning there that commandlet's going to have some new changes in the future. However, our VM configuration or our VM is being created. Okay, so now we can see that the virtual machine was built. I got a result of true and a status code of OK. And what I want to do is actually go out and get that VM and take a look at the results. So I'm going to issue the command get Azure REM VM, the resource group name and the VM name. And I'm going to actually format the output with just the properties I want to see. And we can see that the name is there, that it is license type Windows Server. That's key. If you're using Hub benefit, using Bring Your Own License, this is what you want to see, a license type of Windows Server. And what we can do is compare that to another VM that is running in Azure, and we can see that I have another VM that is running Windows Server that I deployed from just a standard Azure image, and the license type is blank. So you definitely want to see this license type of Windows Server, and if that is the case, then you can be certain that you are only being charged for compute and not licensing. So I hope this was helpful for everyone. You can get a lot more details about the Hub benefit from the education blog at the URL provided earlier in the slides, and there are lots of other interesting articles in that location as well. Thank you very much.